Last month's improved state budget forecast has given me the opportunity to recalibrate my initial proposal on January 22nd. During that time, it has also become clear to me that the broad tax reform, which I had proposed, lacks the public and legislative support to be enacted. Thus, as I disclosed last week, I am discarding the extension of the state sales tax to business services. My principle of tax fairness then leads me to eliminate extending the sales tax to any consumer purchases. I now propose that no change be made to Minnesota's existing sales tax structure, including no taxation of either purchased services or clothes by families, individuals, or businesses. In addition to broad tax reform, my other two principal priorities have been, one, to make the overall state and local tax structure fairer to middle-income Minnesota families and individuals, and two, to raise sufficient revenues to make significant new investments in areas which would help grow our economy and create new jobs. I believe this revised budget proposal accomplishes those two goals. The most progressive state and local tax is the state's personal income tax. Therefore, my persistent efforts to add a fourth tier to the state income tax, which would raise taxes on only the top 2% of income earners, would reduce the current unfairness whereby middle-income taxpayers in Minnesota pay a 26% higher share of their incomes in state and local taxes than do the top 1%. My revised budget proposal would retain the snowbird tax, the cigarette tax, and the elimination of corporate tax loopholes, as outlined in my initial proposal. Combined with the fourth tier, they would raise an estimated $1,816,000,000 in the next biennium. That additional revenue is insufficient to permit the $500 per homeowner property tax rebate that I earlier proposed, reductions in the sales and corporate tax rates, or a freeze in the statewide property tax. However, there would be enough new revenue to eliminate the $627 million deficit now projected for the next biennium, and to fully fund my previously recommended investments in economic development and education. The improved budget forecast allows me to reduce additional tax revenues by $300 million, while also increasing the debt service to finance a $750 million bonding bill, fully fund Minnesota Care, and make other needed expenditures. I believe this proposal is the responsible, balanced budget that the people of Minnesota deserve. There are no shifts, borrowing, or other gimmicks to balance it. Just honest, straightforward accounting. We're still paying off those past debts. However, we're making great progress. We've repaid $1.9 billion of our debt to the school districts in the last 2 years. We will pay off the rest. Then we can begin future fiscal years with earned surpluses and move Minnesota even farther ahead. I'd like to ask now Commissioner Showalter to walk you through the first of the handouts. Commissioner.
Thank you, Governor. For those of you looking at your handouts, I'll be just walking real briefly through the slides that take you through the financials and summary of the Governor's supplemental recommendations. First slide on page 1. It shows you the top level view of the Governor's recommended changes based upon the February forecast. As you'll see, the revenue changes, the expenditure changes leave us with a budgetary balance of $8 million on the bottom line. As the Governor underscored in his remarks, no shifts, no gimmicks, and I'll walk you through some of the pieces of that on the next couple of pages. On page 2, you'll see the changes really between the Governor's initial recommendations and what are here in the March supplemental recommendations. At the top, you'll see that the forecast improved the budgetary picture by $323 million. Under forecast revenues, you go to the right-hand side of that column. So the revenues increased as part of that overarching budget change. The other part of the forecast change is shown below under forecast spending, where you see a reduction in forecast spending. Layered into that now are repriced governor's recommendations, because we're basing them on this new estimate of economic caseload information that we have from the February forecast, along with any policy changes that are included in the supplemental recommendations. Together, they get you to a change that is very small from his initial recommendations at just $2 million different. Included in that, on the next page, is a more detailed listing of the provisions that the governor walked through and here you see them at the aggregate level in the numbers. On the individual income tax, that's not a change in his recommendations. What you see here is the impact of the forecast, which improved revenues between last November and presently by about $297 million, plus the withdrawal of the property tax credits. If you recall, that was about $1.4 billion. That was netted against the individual income tax revenue, so that plus the forecast change equals the $1.7 billion change that you see there. On the other, go down a couple other lines, what you see is the sales tax changes. And what you would anticipate there is a decrease in revenues due to the elimination of the sales tax broadening, both on businesses and on consumers. Put those together with the other changes that you see here. Most of the other changes that you see on this change sheet, by the way, are related to the forecast, not necessarily proposals changing on a net basis for the governor's recommendations. And you see that the total revenue picture changes by $26 million. That is paired with changes to the governor's spending recommendations on the next page. Here, again, you see the impact of the forecast plus changes in recommendations. On the first line, you see changes in the education spending. That is really almost entirely $9 million of forecast change. $13 million change in higher education is a deficiency request. And there's, on net basis, very small changes to the package of recommendations that the governor put forward in January. Included in that is an increase in debt service of $22 million to support the larger capital budget recommendations that the governor mentioned earlier, for a total net change of spending of $47 million. As with his initial package, this set of recommendations both balances the current biennium, so without any shifts, without any one-time actions, and it also just goes into the next biennium in a sustained fashion. On the last chart, you'll see the changes to the budget as we go into fiscal year 16 and 17. Structural balance in that biennium is $305 million. What it does not include, of course, is the growth in the sales tax expansion, which would have significantly improved the balance in those future years and would have been designated to pay off the K-12 payment shifts. This amount is still about enough to pay off the 8 payment shift in 16-17, and as the governor noted, we are certainly making progress with each successive forecast either way. As usual, MMB will be providing detailed item-by-item descriptions of changes in the governor's supplemental recommendations. Those should be coming out in the next couple of hours. We will put those on our website for you to be looking at and going through, and anticipate agencies working with the legislature through the committee hearing to talk about each of these changes. On a net basis, though, this provides you, I think, a summary of the high-level expenditure and revenue changes in the supplemental recommendations.
I just want to close by saying that some people say, well, we don't need any additional revenues to be able to balance the budget. What they don't say is that there's a $627 million deficit that then would have to be made up with further cuts in the existing budget forecast. And just say no to tax increases is not a budget plan, and it's not responsible. If people don't want to raise any additional revenues, then they need to cut $627 million out of the budget, and it's their responsibility to tell us where they're going to cut, how much, who's going to be affected, and who's going to be hurt. We went through this for the last 2 years, where it couldn't get the majority in the legislature to come forth honestly and say, where are you going to cut? And the same principle applies, and I challenge them, if they're going to take that tack, which I expect they will, to tell us specifically where you're going to cut. Furthermore, I think these additional investments in education are crucial to moving Minnesota forward. And I found that even among those who don't want to pay taxes to support them, there's generally very, very broad support for undertaking the new initiatives in early childhood education, creating a continuum through optional all-day kindergarten, and read by the 3rd grade, linking high school to higher education, training our young people for the jobs of the future rather than the past. So those investments are all ones that I think have widespread support, and that the experts tell us are going to be crucial to the economic success of our state in the future. So I think it's a balanced approach. As I said before, it's a balance of selective revenue increases, raising taxes only on the wealthiest 2% of Minnesotans, and also making investments that are going to pay off for a better Minnesota. So I'd be glad to respond to questions on this topic.
Governor, did you brief this with PFL legislative leaders, and are they backing this fully?
Talk with them about it in general, but I have not. Staff may have shared it this morning in the details that you have here now, but talked about the general outlines of it. You have to ask them whether they support it or not. I believe so.
Governor, does this mean that you would veto any sales tax reform, lower or broadening sales tax, clothing tax?
Well, I'm not going to get into veto. I'm not going to use that word at this point in the legislative session. I don't support any increase in or change in the sales tax as it relates to anybody. And that's my position. I think that's sound fiscal policy and good public policy, and I'll try to persuade any legislators who think otherwise the wisdom of that.
So you retain the metro sales tax for transportation, though?
Yes, that goes on, because this, again, it's dedicated for a specific purpose there.
Because you're a smaller base?
Well, there's some question, because it was calculated on the basis of the broader sales tax base. So it was originally a quarter cent, and now there's some debate whether it needs to be a half cent or whether they're going to say a quarter cent, which they're thrashing out in local government affairs committee and the like. So I don't know the answer to that one.
Much of the criticism of the business-to-business sales tax was on the grounds of competitiveness, that it would make Minnesota anti-competitive. The same thing is going to be said about this higher income tax rate. How is this a different situation?
Well, then, again, I think it's incumbent on those who don't want the higher income tax rate, who probably are going to also oppose closing the corporate tax loopholes, to tell us, what's their alternative. I mean, if we didn't have all these past debts to pay off, and we could have taken that $1.9 billion of surpluses over the last 2 years and carried that forward, as you would normally, into the next biennium, we'd start the biennium with a $1.3 billion surplus rather than a $627 million deficit, and we wouldn't need to raise anybody's taxes. But that's not the situation that we inherited from the past. $627 million deficit, and if you're not going to raise the income taxes, you're not going to raise corporate taxes, then where are you going to get the additional revenues, or where are you going to cut? And that's what everybody leaves out. This is part of a package, part of a responsible, balanced package to balance the budget and make new investments that we need for a better future. And those who don't want to pay a single dollar more in taxes need to own up to the responsibility to tell us what are the consequences of that.
Governor, is this still bold? Majority Leader Bott called this bold, unlike anything you've seen since Ruby Purpich. Is it still bold?
Well, it's not as bold as it was before. I talked about Plan A, B, and C. This is Plan B plus, I'd say. I think it's one that can have legislative support, public support, and accomplishes the other two objectives. As I've said, it makes our tax system more progressive overall, less regressive, I should say, less regressive overall, and it generates enough additional revenue along with the improved forecast to be able to fund the priorities that I have made in education and economic development incentives.
Governor,
The status of the chamber feel fortunate that they aren't getting the business-to-business tax, and that should they quote suck it up and stop lobbying against the top bracket.
No, I mean, that's been their consistent position for two plus years I've been governor. No additional taxes, and they have a right to that position. And again, my issue there is that they don't recognize the fact that state spending has been reduced significantly, both in real and relative terms, for the last decade. So we're not talking about reducing an increase. We're talking about trying to turn the corner on what is right now the lowest level of state support for higher education since over 30 years ago in real dollars. And secondly, that they don't offer any explanation for where that $627 million cut would have to come from to offset the projected deficit. But they still have a right to articulate whatever position they want.
Governor, what corporate loopholes would you close?
Well, I'll leave that to Commissioner Franz here, but you want to go ahead and...
We would essentially have the same corporate loopholes in the original package: the foreign operating company credit or deduction, the foreign royalty payment deduction, and some other minor ones that are listed in the handout papers. But it's essentially the same package. It is the same package that we had before, but we would continue to ask the affiliate nexus or the e-fairness be changed so that those companies who are selling out of state into Minnesota, who have people selling on their behalf in the state of Minnesota, would have to collect a sales tax. So we would add that affiliate nexus to the corporate reform area as well.
Governor, I know you hesitate to give ultimatums, but is the income tax your bottom line, and does it have to be there for you to support a budget?
Well, again, I'm open to alternatives, and the legislative process in terms of the tax and spending side has really just begun. The targets are going to be issued, I think, next week and the week then after the Easter recess, and then we'll get a focus on what the levels of spending they are proposing and how that spending will be allocated, and then we'll see what kind of tax proposals they have to raise revenues to balance the budget, and then we'll have something to talk about. So far, we've had my proposal number one, now my proposal number two, and as I learned 2 years ago, until there's something to compare that with coming from the legislature, it's hard to have a focused discussion. So we'll get there soon enough.
Governor, are you concerned the snowbird tax is going to drive some wealthier Minnesotans out of the state permanently?
No, I think it's going to make them pay their fair share of taxes if they want to come back and spend time with their children and their grandchildren. I mean,
spend less than 6 months here and
pay nothing.
Avoid the tax.
And pay nothing. I mean, the practical difficulty is with the hospitality industry and areas like Brainerd Lakes and others in that part of the state where people come and have essentially second homes, summer homes, and they're there for 2-3 months. I don't know how many people there are in that category, but that's a concern that's expressed, and I don't know how to work around that. But I just believe in the principle of tax fairness. You pay according to your income, your wealth, and if you're going to be here for 5 months and 29 days, using all the services that all the rest of us pay taxes to support, then you ought to pay a proportionate share for doing so. And to me, that's just simple fairness. And this attitude that people want to make more and more money and pay less and less taxes or pay no taxes or get a rebate is just really distressing, because this society won't be successful if that becomes the prevalent ethic going forward.
Yet, Governor, at the same time you acknowledge that snowbird likely not to pass?
I don't think it'll pass unless we're going to work out this hospitality issue. Again, I don't know how many people are affected by that, and what our options might be, but that's a sticking point.
Governor, are you more comfortable with this budget? This is what you had campaigned on, taxing the rich, and at the time you were campaigning, you were against sales tax increases. Are you more comfortable in your soul and your legacy with this budget than you were before?
Well, the Department of Revenue modeled over 100 different scenarios with different families, different income groups, individuals, different parts of the state on the sales tax, and it came out revenue neutral overall, and basically revenue neutral for individual families or individuals in terms of paying sales tax on more items, services, and clothing, but paying a lower rate. We dropped the rate 20%. We dropped the rate from 7th highest rate in the country to 27th highest in the country. And so that came out even, and then most of those families would get a $500 property tax rebate every year ongoing. So in my view, most Minnesotans, middle-income Minnesotans, came out paying less taxes, state and local, no more at the state level at all, and less taxes because of the property tax rebate than they were before. So I consider that consistent with my principles. I mean, it's a different way of getting there, but it certainly accomplished that. And now this is not going to provide the property tax relief, and the legislature, I've encouraged them to look at ways that they can do so. It'll be more limited with the amount of revenue, but I still think property tax relief is very important. And so this doesn't allow us to do as many things as we would with a broader reform, but that's the way it is.
How disappointed are you that you aren't going to be a comprehensive reform to our rather Byzantine tax?
I was mindful going into this. Governor Perpich proposed sales tax, broadening the base. Governor Ventura, and I met with similar fates. Wayne Gretzky said you never score a goal on 100% of the shots you don't take. So, you take your shots, and some of them score and some of them don't, and that's the way this process is supposed to work.
Governor, why did you decide to leave the cigarette tax in? That's been less than tasteful for you.
Well, I've been supported in the past because it's regressive. I'm persuaded by Commissioner Ellinger, the Department of Health, and other health experts that it's principal way, the cost of a pack of cigarettes is the principal way that you keep young people from starting to smoke, and then encouraging people who are now smoking to stop. So that and the balance outweighed the other considerations.
How about alcohol tax? Would you take that as well?
I don't think to me it's not the same thing. I mean, people, if you smoke, and the health effects are detrimental from the beginning. Most people can drink in moderation, and some studies say there are health benefits to that. But either way, I don't think the fact of drinking is the same deleterious effect on people as the fact of smoking. Now, obviously, people who can't consume alcohol and abuse it, different story. But that requires a different approach in my mind.
Would you veto it?
Again, I'm not going to use that word at this stage of the process.
What's the magic of the top 2%? What it means? Some law you're talking potentially a broader pool. Why 2?
Well, it's about 54,000 taxpayers. The average income is about $617,000. We got into this 2 years ago with, what level is somebody, quote unquote rich, whatever. I mean, I think most people would agree that an average income of $617,000 a year, that's taxable income, is very well off. So I think it defines it better as the very wealthiest people. The studies show, the Department of Revenue and other studies, that that top 1% and 2% pay significantly less of their incomes, the percent of their incomes in state and local taxes than the rest. And by the Department of Revenue's most recent analysis, the top 1% pays about 78% pays 22% less than the middle income families. Another one has it at 26%. So there's a big drop off. Our tax system is fairly flat until you get to the top tier, and then it's steeply regressive. And that's just unfair, and those are people who can most afford to help us through this period of time. As I said, if we get to a point 2 years from now, the continued economic growth pay off the rest of the school shift, and we're starting the next biennium with a positive balance sheet, then I think we won't need to be talking about taxes or tax increases. We can talk about redirecting our focus and tax reductions and the like, but we're not in that situation yet. We're still pulling ourselves out of this big hole, and we need the wealthiest people to help us get out of it.
A lot of economists will say that lowering sales taxes and broadening the base is a good way to stabilize that source of revenue. Why aren't you open to tinkering with that or looking at some of the proposals in the legislature to still look at the sales tax and maybe do something with it, with the exception of, the most controversial part of going after business services?
Well, the sales tax, again, I'll leave it to the Department of Revenue, but their suits index, the sales tax is still mildly regressive. So if you focus on the sales tax, you're having the effect of raising the relative tax burden on the middle class. And that's exactly the opposite of what I want to do. I believe the middle class is overtaxed and the upper class is undertaxed, and my way of approaching it is a better way to accomplish the revenue increases necessary to offset the deficit and make the investments I want in education and economic development. And I just think it's a better way to approach it.
Governor, would you be receptive to other transportation tax increases other than the 4% sales tax? There's been a gas tax proposal out there, wheelage, tab fees, a lot of different things have been mentioned. Does any of that strike a chord?
Well, I don't, excuse me. We have a serious need for additional investments in transportation, as the task force that I set up last year reported. The trouble is that I don't support an increase in the gasoline tax because it doesn't get us very far. And I don't think you raise the tax without showing you're going to get a specific result, and you're not going to have public support. I mean, the legacy amendment showed people are willing to vote to raise their own sales tax if they believe it's going to go for specific purposes that they support. I'm hopeful that Commissioner Zelli will give him a year's time, be able to come with a plan that's comprehensive, that's really going to get us to a better transportation network statewide in the next 10 to 20 years, and that we'll go around together and build public support for that. But we're not there yet.
Governor, what are you going to do to convince the legislature and the public to pass this? Are you going to do anything, or is it just...
I'm going to go out and do my best to promote it, sell it, persuade people, and again, to posit the alternative. I mean, nobody wants to pay more taxes, but the alternative is more cuts, and more and no new investments in education and economic growth. So to me, there's a stark contrast between what balanced approach that I'm offering here and those in the extreme who just want to say no to everything and avoid responsibility for the consequences.
If you run for re-election and you win, would you go back to a sales tax overhaul?
I can honestly say I have not given that 1 second of thought. I thought about winning occasionally, but not the other part.
When are you planning to release your bonding proposal? And I think you said $750 million. Are you looking then to do that this year as opposed to the second year?
Yeah, for this year, and with the option to do, we have the debt capacity under the guidelines rules to do $1.5 billion for the biennium. So my thought is 750 this year and 750 next year. We got so many projects that are really important and needed and backed up, and then we've got the enormous 240 million or of bonding for this renovation here. So I mean, it's a big getting down to 750 is we're already in that process. It's very challenging, and I'd say 2 weeks. 2 weeks from now, we'll have a. That's the recess week.
That's it.
I don't know if that's the reason to do it then or not, but either that 2 weeks or 3 weeks, one or the other.
Governor, do you have any money in here for the Mayo Clinic expansion?
I don't know, because that's sort of an unknown at this point, but I'm strongly supportive of that. I don't know what form that financial support's going to take, so there's nothing in here for it, but I'm very supportive of it.
You've expressed concerns about the financial mechanism for it before. Can you talk a little bit about what you're concerned about with the Mayo plan?
Well, last time I talked with Mayo leadership, they wanted $600 million from the state over 20 years. Well, that's $30 million a year, and conceivably you could pay that on a cash basis. I can't obligate future governors and future legislatures, but my understanding is that they want us to essentially bond for the whole $600 million up front. I mean, that's you see with a $750 million bonding bill for the whole state, that's almost unfeasible. So we're hoping and we're working toward finding some way that they can have the financial support and the security that, as much as possible, they're going to have that on an ongoing basis. Although I can't conceive of this project be getting 5 years, 6 years down the road, and then having anybody want to pull out of it. I mean, it's just, I find that inconceivable, but I understand their desire to have, better assurances than mine. And, I'm optimistic we'll find something. It's a great project. I mean, Mayo is just, priceless in terms of its value to the state and value to Rochester, Olmsted County. And, they have 2 other facilities, one in Arizona, one in Florida. And so they have options for their own further development and growth. And they have competition, as they said, from Johns Hopkins, from Cleveland. And, we either help them continue to be the best in the world, or, we won't have the benefit of that. Success will so be.
What about the timing on the same-sex marriage bills that await action on the House and Senate floor? Do you want them to wait until after the budget, as we've heard the plan, or does the timing not matter?
Well, that's what they've said from the very beginning, and I don't have a quarrel with that. The timing of when to bring things forward, I defer to the House and Senate leadership. They're much closer to their members and to the process than I am. But the session is the session, so that's their sense of the best timing. Then so be it.
Is there one last question?
Does delaying it, Governor, improve or lessen its chances of getting to your debt?
Well, I believe that the leadership in both the House and Senate, want to pass it, and therefore their determination is that it better serves the likelihood of passage by the timing they choose. And that's my assumption. So I've got to believe that that's part of their strategy. Okay, thank you.